You're watching the PoliticIt Podcast.
Good evening and welcome to PoliticIt Podcast. I'm Senator John Johnson. Today we have Sam Adolphsen with us, policy advisor to President Trump. I like to start just by people getting to know you, and how did you get it? What was your life journey in a way that led you into that position, a fairly senior position in terms of advising the president on policy, right?
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Senator. It's great to be here. Yeah, I just finished up a tour of duty. I like to call it domestic deployment at the White House. I was the Deputy Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy. And the Domestic Policy Council is a council within the White House that works on all the domestic issues. And I was the Deputy Director of that council in the White House. And it's kind of a long journey to get there, but I give you a real short version. I'm from Maine. I grew up in Maine, and after I got done college, I hooked up with some state Senate campaigns and worked for a lot of years in states on policy issues, including here in Utah. Had the chance to be here a number of times and work on some great legislation. And I also worked for the governor in Maine. And, I found myself... There
weren't a lot of Republican governors in Maine.
That's right. I worked for the last Republican governor, Paul LePage, in Health and Human Services, and learned a lot about the welfare programs and things like that. And all that kind of led to this great opportunity, really the honor of a lifetime, to serve President Trump for a little more than a year there in the West Wing.
That's amazing when you think about, well, I mean, in talking to you, it sounds like your job was really to outline the promises he made and make sure they happen.
Yeah, exactly. I was working for Vince Haley, who's currently the domestic policy advisor for the president, a great man, has worked for the president for a long time, really back to the first term. And, we talked going into the administration about what we wanted the Domestic Policy Council to be. And we settled on making sure it was the Office of Promises Kept. And that's what we called it. We put it on posters. We put it in our office. And, we took every campaign promise, everything the president said he was going to do, and we put it on a checklist, and we put it in a book, and it was on all our desks. And that was our anchor. If we were confused, or if we didn't know what we were doing that day, that hour, we would open that book and make sure we were going down that list and getting done things the president said he was going to do, which, may seem basic, but of course, not always the case that when people get elected, they actually follow through. I think that's what makes President Trump, one of the things that makes him so special. And, it was really important for us to anchor around that.
So, you must, that idea of a swamp, and you think about it, I guess so often people go into that and they get stuck in that mindset and they kind of just want to go along, right? They want to be important and they want to, get praise from people, and it just seems like they move away from that. So what's the anchor really that kept that from happening in your mind?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it certainly happens, right? You get in there, the bright lights come on, you're in the Roosevelt room, you got cabinet members walking around, you go get your morning coffee and you're bumping into Secretary Rubio and Caroline Leavitt, and people get kind of starstruck. They could get, kind of get used to the power. And I think that has happened over the years. And you see Washington work that way. I think this time around, it was really different. The president knew coming in, he had to assemble a team focused on one mission, making America great again, keeping the promises, getting these things done for the American people. And it was all about the work. It was all about doing the job. People were brought in on merit, which was a big push that we restored to the entire federal government, hiring on merit. And, I think we were really anchored around doing the job, getting it done. And, for the Domestic Policy Council, we came in with a bunch of people who had worked in the states. And Utah really has passed lots of great things over the past few years that you see reflected in the Trump administration. So I think having people with experience in the states kind of kept us grounded, back where people are, not just in DC.
Well, when I first came into the legislature, a lot of the people, the first 100 days of Governor Cox, they signed this Utah Compact on DEI. They had been infected by this woke mind virus, right? And, I noticed how hard that was to drop a bomb on that coming in, right? But that's what I really like about Trump and this idea that you really attack these problems that we're sending our country in the wrong direction, in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the great things about the president, this is, I think, very obvious to people who are paying attention, is he will take on all the battles. He's not going to shy away. He has an ability to tackle problems that have not been tackled before by anybody. And I think he really looked across those terrible 4 years under Joe Biden in this country when DEI and all those things came in really into their full strength. And he watched states fighting back against it. He saw how that played out and really collected the best ways to attack it, defeat it, and reverse it. And that really helped build his agenda, his platform, which we carried right into the administration and implementing it.
I think people have a hard time comprehending that was so embedded in the culture of Washington and the deep state, right? We call it, but it's so embedded, But you think about what they had accomplished, and of course, when you accomplish this power, right, it's hard to give it up. But starting with the Hegelian dialectic and going into, just this whole idea, this whole push, Marxism had hit a brick wall, and all of a sudden there was this push to undermine really the foundational principles of Western civilization. And I don't think people realize that this was an orchestrated strategy. And when Kamala Harris came out and said she didn't want to be she wanted to be unburdened by what has been, right? And that's such a statement when you think about it, and the whole making America great again is going back to those foundational principles.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably disturbing, but as bad as it was in that period of time, the kind of 2020 to 2024, when we got in there and started looking under the hood of the federal government, it was way worse than even we thought. DEI, critical, race theory, all that thinking, the woke mind virus, as Elon called it, was embedded in every piece and part of the federal government. Hiring, contracts, grants, eligibility systems, data, every piece and part was threaded with racial equity and DEI. The way people were promoted in the federal government was 100% based on, did they adhere to those standards? The way the Department of Education put out guidance and pushed down to our schools and our higher education was entirely centered around that, every piece and part. And so I think we kind of knew that going in. You see it in the States, you were fighting it back in the States, but it really was worse than we thought.
Well, when you look at that whole Doge effort and Elon coming in, and I think a lot of people are assuming that, that hit a brick wall and it's not going anywhere. But, undoing years of things that were centered around that and the corruption that came from it. I was so excited when those early Doge things came in and started tearing down some of those walls and the funding mechanisms that were in place within the government. You were there, right?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah, it was really exciting time. And, for me, I kind of cut my teeth with Governor Paul LePage back in Maine on finding welfare fraud and digging into the systems and exposing that and dealing with it. I've been fighting Somalian pirate EBT card fraud for a decade. And so it was exciting to get in with Elon and his team and start attacking all that, looking at all the data systems, all the money that was flowing out the door. And they made huge strides. I think the key to the enduring legacy of Doge, and a lot of people think it left when Elon left, it didn't. A lot of the great men and women who came in for that effort, they're still there.
These were young kids, weren't they?
They were. A lot of them were very young, very talented data experts. You know, a lot of them weren't particularly political, but they knew there was something wrong. There's this injustice about money flowing to people who didn't deserve it, often based in and backed by DEI type principles. And they said, we got to fix this. This is, you know, we have this national debt. You're a 25-year-old kid. You're looking at you know, a lifetime of futility, all to pay for what? You know, trillions and trillions of dollars in debt that you're going to be saddled with. So they were very passionate, inspired by that. And a lot of them have stayed around in the federal government. And, you know, the other thing is there were a lot of traditional people, I include myself here, more traditional policy people who really were Doge-minded coming into it as well. And, you know, Doge was new, but the thinking about attacking corruption and fraud and protecting the American taxpayer and the truly needy are things we'd worked on for a long time. So there was this great marriage of kind of traditional policy and Doge that still endures to this day. You see it with the fraud task force that the vice president is chairing. And, you know, you see it with all the different things that are happening on the anti-fraud measures that continue today.
Well, you know, we're going to take a break and we'll come right back.
Tired of media bias? Frustrated by political noise? PoliticIt.com cuts through the clutter, giving you real facts, clear analysis, and unbiased insight on the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay empowered. Whether it's elections, policy changes, or breaking news, we've got you covered. No spin, no agendas, just truth you can trust. Visit PoliticIt.com today, because informed citizens shape the future. PoliticIt.com, where politics meets clarity.
Welcome back to PoliticIt. We've got Sam Adolphsen. And, you know, it's so fascinating to listen to someone that was there, right? You mentioned something offline where, you know, we literally were looking at the end of the country in a way when you think about all the things that were going on up to this moment, and being a bullet shy of a totally different outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think from where we sit today, there were there have been a lot of amazing wins over the last year in DC, led by the president. So many great executive orders dealing with problems, so many good things happening across the board. And it can be kind of easy to forget not very long ago, that period of time, 2020 to 2024, just how bad it was. And if you go back through what they were doing to kids, you know, mutilating children, what they were pushing in the schools with CRT and DEI, what we dealt with, you know, government overreach and COVID lockdowns, and across the board, we were on the brink, I believe, and I felt this way when I was asked to serve, that we were on the brink of kind of falling into the abyss here. And that's the kind of moment that requires people to stand up and get involved in ways they maybe haven't before, and take this on. And the president's inspiring leadership that way, I think, drew in a lot of great people, including, you know, folks like Elon that we mentioned, that came off the sideline. I think of Joe Gebbia, a friend he started Airbnb. He decided to come in the government and help rebuild and redesign the government. Sacrificed a lot to do that, because these people recognized, like we do, that we were right on the precipice. And we have to be vigilant, because as many wins as there are, as much good that is happening in DC, we can't rest on that. I mean, this is a battle for the future of not just our country, humanity, Western civilization, which is really the thing holding back the tide of evil. And we can't let our guard down at all on that. And I'm glad that there are many, many good people in DC and in the States that are, thinking that way.
So I want to ask some personal questions inside. You worked with Stephen Miller, of course. You worked with Susie Wiles. These are people that have really been maligned in the press, right? What were they like behind the scenes? What did it feel like being part of that?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was just an honor. It truly was. What an incredible experience. Chief Wiles is one of the best people that I've ever met, not just in politics, not just in the industry. She's a fantastic person. She did such a great job of orienting the White House around what we talked about before, keeping the promises of the president. What do we need to get done for the American people? And with so many distractions and so many potential points of drama, you can imagine how difficult the job that is. And she did it with grace and strength. Stephen Miller, I had the chance to work a lot with Stephen, particularly on things like welfare and immigration and the crossover of that. Of course, people weren't coming here illegally for no reason. They were coming here to take welfare. They're coming here to take benefits. They're coming here to take treasure away from the American people. And so I had a chance to work with Stephen a lot on that. And
that's the whole Cloward and Piven strategy in a way, right?
That's right.
You bankrupt the nation, you can take it over in a way, right?
That's right. And we were invaded, and they weren't coming for like better weather. They were coming to take from us. And Stephen's incredibly brilliant. I can't say enough about his his strategy mind and how he really saw the full picture of what needed to be done to reorient all these domestic policy issues, homeland security issues, and get those things in the right position. He was always challenging us to think wisely, make good, strategic decisions, and really take on tough fights. I'll give you an example. For the first time ever in our nation's history, we are following the law around immigration and welfare. We have laws called public charge laws. And if you are going to come here as an immigrant, we need to make sure that you're not going to become a burden on the taxpayer. And this is long-standing immigration law going back forever. But nobody's ever taken it on. Nobody's actually followed the law because it's difficult. Well, Stephen takes on the tough fights, just like the president. And so we dug into that issue. And I'm happy to say for the first time ever, we're actually making sure that people who come here are not going to go on welfare. And if they do, they're going to return that money to the taxpayers, that they and the folks who sponsor them. So that's an example of the type of thing that that Stephen would take on.
Wow. So it had to be really interesting to be in there. I mean, you mentioned 3 points when we were off camera that I thought were interesting, that you're going to kind of center on today. I mean, you're going to be speaking at our Lincoln Day dinner today, right? And, of course, we're not going to spoil anything because this will come out way after that. But let's talk a little bit about those points, right? What are those central themes that you think are important for people in Utah to understand?
Yeah, well, it's great to be here too in Weber County. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm going to tell people today a couple things, a couple key points. And one is we already kind of hit on it. It was worse than we thought when we got in there and got under the hood. DEI threaded all throughout the government and all that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then the other thing is it's better now than the president gets credit for. He has done so much, over 200 executive orders, and we relentlessly implemented those within the federal bureaucracy. We pushed that all the way down to the ground level, and things are really turning. There's some examples. There's 3.5 million fewer people on the food stamp program. Government dependency is shrinking. We have the lowest federal government employment we've had since the 1970s. We're right-sizing federal government. We're getting back to basics. We have people hired on merit, not DEI. We have stopped hospitals from mutilating children in these crazy, transgender things they were doing during the Biden year. So there's great things happening under the president's.
Well, and you look at that whole effect in the military,
Yes, we got the, trans out of military. Kind of the list goes on and on of so many great accomplishments.
This isn't, and I think one of the things that people fail to recognize, this isn't about hate for other people. It's defending the sovereignty, the rights of the American people and the taxpayers, right?
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. Think about this fraud we're seeing that's been exposed under this administration. You think about like the Minnesota fraud.
Well, the guy that was going to be vice president.
Incredible.
With Kamala, who didn't want to be burdened by what has been, right?
That's right. And the fraud is by design. It's part of this strategy you already talked about. They opened the door to this. They changed the rules. They got rid of all eligibility requirements. You can basically come in. You can come in from another country. You can come in and apply for benefits, get on with nothing but self-attestation, the honor system, and then steal from not just the American people, but the truly needy people who depend on these programs. And, you're along the way making the cost of everything go up. So these kind of...
Which basically, in the end, bankrupts the whole thing, that makes it so we can't even take care of the poor among us.
That's right. That's right. And so we have turned back the tide on these things. We're fighting them all back. The Trump administration has taken on all comers on those fights and is really returning, those programs, those processes, those policies, procedures to the way they should have been all along. And the other thing I want people to know today here in Utah that I'm going to talk about is that they're much more important to this fight than maybe they think they are. And they've done more than they maybe think they have. I really believe when we're talking to people in a county meeting, we're talking to state legislators like yourself, the governor's office, you all are there in the West Wing with us. You really were. Because for all those years before this Trump administration, the states were taking on those fights one by one, pushing back, holding back the tide of darkness, really. And they were passing work requirements and welfare. They were getting DEI out of schools. They were helping fix elections. And really one thing after another, that when you look across the landscape in Utah and in other states, ended up becoming the Trump agenda, the Trump 47 agenda that we installed and implemented in the White House. And so everybody should really feel like they were part of that, because they were. And a reminder to be vigilant, because we don't know what's going to happen in 26 and 28 and beyond, but we do know that people will still be here in county meetings. They'll still be knocking on doors. They'll still be pushing the good ideas, that make sure that America is first in all these conversations.
Well, and I think that, when you talk about this America First agenda, or you even talk about making America great again, or you talk about, the Winthrop idea of us being a shining city on a hill, right? I mean, it's got to be somewhat satisfying, having been in the middle of that, right? And people are going to wonder, why are you leaving?
Yeah, well,
right?
That's a great question. Yeah, it was unbelievable experience and an honor to be part of it, and help install, I think, really a policy revolution in this first year. We're 250 years as a country. We had our American Revolution and that built this nation, and I really think over the last year there's been a policy revolution I was proud to be part of. It was hard to leave. I wanted to keep helping, but I'll tell you, I live in Maine with my family. I have a wife and four young kids, and I was commuting back and forth back home to Maine. They stayed in Maine because I'm from a huge family. I got cousins everywhere. My grandparents are still alive. They live right down the road. And I really think that is the core of America. That's what I was trying to protect by being part of this administration, is to be able to live peacefully in your quiet rural town, make a living, raise your kids, go to church, stay near your family. And, ultimately I wanted to go back to that. There were a lot of people like that in the administration, I think, that came out to do a deployment because they saw how
I like that term, deployment, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely
boots on the ground in Washington, right?
We were in a battle for the future of the country. And there are many, many great people that are going to continue on in the administration right through the end. And they're going to do a great job. And we'll try to do everything we can.
So what's next for you?
Yeah, well, first I'm here in Utah, and I'm going to tell the story. But no, I'm going to continue to work in the domestic policy space. I spent the last decade working in states and trying to advance the cause on the ground of kind of freedom and keep those lights of liberty burning here in the States. So I'll be back doing that.
We're fortunate to have you. I know, I guess it was Speaker Schultz that reached out to you. I know you know a number of other people, Dave O and others in Utah, but it's interesting to, I don't think we realize here what strong connections people within Utah have within the administration and with people like you, right?
Yeah, Speaker Schultz did reach out to me. He's great. He's been a friend for some years. And I'll tell you, he came into the White House, to the West Wing, to visit. There was a whole delegation that came in from Utah, the Utah legislature, and we did a day-long session with them. And we shared policy ideas. They shared feedback. We talked about the things that needed alignment, or ideas that where Utah could help the federal government's efforts and vice versa. And we really had a great sync up on how we could join together and partner in advancing the causes of freedom. So really great experience with the Utah delegation there, being part of the Trump administration work, and so excited to be back here.
In conclusion, I mean, because we're out of time, but in conclusion, what advice do you have to people like me, or people that show up at these Lincoln Day dinners, strong conservatives that want to make a difference? What advice do you have? Yeah,
well, I would say just never back down. Taking the cue from the president. You've got a picture up here in the studio of the president immediately after he was shot, and it's the same picture we used on in our office on our little book of promises that we were going to keep for the American people. And so I think the only advice I would give is just stay in the fight. Just keep at it. There's going to be some losses. There's going to be some things you don't like that happen in a session or with a particular election. But this is a lot bigger than that. The president knows that. He put his life on the line for it. This is about the future of our country, the future of Western civilization. So put your head down, keep doing the work, and stay in the fight.
Oh, appreciate you coming in, Sam. It's really a pleasure to have you. We'll see you guys next week.